Kia ora tātou, no mai haere mai, ko Wayne Masters, taku and gore. Hello and welcome to our first of our RugbySmart webinars. My name is Wayne Masters. I'm a game development manager for New Zealand Rugby, and I'll be helping kicking things off this evening, and then I'll be handing over to our illustrious panel. But first, a little bit of an overview of what this is all about and how we can all benefit from the next sort of 40 to 60 minutes. This is the first of a series of webinars that we're running. If you were in a RugbySmart or a Small Blacks course recently, you may have heard about this series, and it's an opportunity for us to follow up on areas which we often hear people discussing at our courses, and that we want to give an opportunity to our coaches, to our managers, to our referees and others in the rugby community to sort of know a little bit more, discuss a little bit more to help you out there in the rugby community with challenges you have and questions that you have, and things that you might like to know more about. So it's going to be a series run on a Wednesday evening at this sort of time, 7:30, and we'll be promoting that through our various sort of portals, Facebook pages, and you may have received an email about this particular webinar, and we'll be discussing things like coaching women's and girls rugby, some things to finish the season strong with, small-sided games and other webinars. This evening we're kicking it off talking around our referees and the laws, and in particular some game priorities that as I said, our panel are going to take us through, and we're very lucky to have a very high-level panel taking us through today. So like the start of a rugby game and start of our trainings, we like to start on time. So we're going to kick things off now. I'm just going to give a quick intro of Matt Peters, who'll be helping run our panel this evening. The others, and I'm sure he'll give a profile of our other guest panelists tonight. But Matt's a game development manager for New Zealand Rugby as well. He has a special lens on referees. He's well known throughout New Zealand. He's been a referee of first-class rugby himself, and been an educator of our match officials and referee coaches for well over a decade around the country in various provincial unions, and has been with New Zealand Rugby for a long time, and also was a player of some note in his own right as well. So without further ado from me, thank you for being on this webinar this evening. There'll be lots of opportunities for you to ask questions, and I'll hand over to Matt Peters.
Thanks, Wayne. Kia ora, everyone. And it is my pleasure to introduce two very high-profile match officials, and I'm hoping that they are not unfamiliar to all of you. So we'll start with Ben O'Keefe. Ben, if you just raise your hand, just in case someone is Ben. So Ben is one of our full-time referees, has been for some time, is a Tier 1 test referee, and is a very, very experienced Super Rugby after many years of refereeing those competitions. So Ben refereed the final, for those who watched the final. So congratulations, Ben, on a job well done, and also a season well done, and in getting that final appointment. So great to have you on board, Ben. And James Dolman. Hand up, James. You're the only one left, so that's good to see the hand. So James, bit of background on James. James is in his second year of full-time refereeing with New Zealand Rugby. James did the under-20 final a couple of years ago in Argentina, the World under-28 final. James is also on the HSBC 7 circuit and is in the top 1, 2, 3 referees on that circuit. So he's got a very exciting event coming up, hopefully in Tokyo. But with the full-time contract, James has also started very strongly a career in professional 15s refereeing with Super Rugby, and so a lot of experience on the 7th circuit and starting the journey in 15s. James was AR1 reserve referee for the Super Rugby final Aotearoa 2021 just last week. So welcome, James. Couple of heavy hitters, fellas. So we'll get into it. So I just want to ask Ben and or James, we're going to focus on the priorities, and it's not a show and tell. People have read the priorities. Hopefully they're familiar with them. But we want Ben and James to actually sort of reflect on some of their experiences with the priorities, and hopefully we can pick up some tips about what's good, what's not working so well, etc., and how we can really benefit from the priorities as coaches, players, and referees. So I just thought some background to how the priorities came to being. Ben or James, just explain to us how they came.
Yeah, thanks Matt for inviting us on board tonight, and obviously thanks for everyone that's joined us as well. Hopefully we can obviously answer any questions that you have. The first one, Matt, in terms of priorities, so we're quite fortunate over the last few years. The law and the laws that we're trying to referee have been, I guess they've been pretty stagnant for a long time. And opportunity arose about 2 years ago when I think as the game became more professional and as the game moved forward, people really wanted to actually see change in the game as well. So a lot of coaches got on board, a lot of players got on board, and in Paris, it was a Paris symposium around, okay, how are we going to actually make the game more enjoyable to watch, safer for players, and actually a better product. So you had some pretty top level coaches. So Ian Foster from New Zealand represented, part of the Southern Hemisphere, and you had Joe Schmidt, who was currently the Irish national coach, but has now moved into a World Rugby high performance manager role. So you had a lot of these coaches, a lot of ex-players. Conrad Smith was involved as well, and they got together and they started talking about the game and actually what needed to change. From that, there was a few focus areas that came out of that, and a lot of them around speed at the tackle, obviously safety in terms of foul play and space in the game as well. And they thought if they could really work on those three things, it was really going to expand the game of rugby that we had. So it was great for us from a point of view from referees, because for many years we have our meetings at the start of the year and we talk about the laws and we sort of referee what's in front of us. But really, this was the first time where coaches and players were taking us into their inner sanctum and talking to us about, okay, this is how we feel the game needs to play in the future, and we want your help to be able to do this. And here's some ideas as well. So it was really great, and so we actually got the opportunity to do that as New Zealanders and as New Zealand referees in Super Rugby last year when the rest of the world wasn't playing rugby. And then obviously you saw the final product of this season this year, where we had a whole season last year probably building into the priorities. People at home were watching them, and then this year we're able to really just hit the ground running. And you saw probably 11 weeks of some, every weekend there was some top quality games where players were being coached the priorities, and because of that, we saw a really good product on the TV. Which made it really, really better for us in terms of referees, and we learned a lot because we actually had a really good relationship. So that understanding from players and coaches allowed us to referee better, and have less influence on a game, and there's sort of a negative aspect. So that's what sort of comes to mind when I answer that question, Matt. Jimmy, any thoughts, mate?
No, mate, I think you've summed that up really well. I really liked that you touched on the fact that the players and the coaches actually drove a lot of that change. Has been mentioned, there's some big names and big rugby minds that were involved in driving that change last year, and you've seen it. You saw it last year at Super Rugby Aotearoa, and now you've seen it rolled out to the rest of the world. And yeah, I think just as Ben mentioned, often we as referees we can get into our own little internal bubble and how we view and understand the law and understand how we are influencing the game, and we talk about the philosophies of that. So it was really refreshing last year leading into Super Rugby Aotearoa after COVID and lockdown to have these rugby minds basically telling us where the direction of rugby needs to go. So really exciting times, and I think you've seen how that has changed for the better of the game of rugby.
Mate, would you agree? Like, it actually made it easier for us because when we were getting coaches and players actually telling us their side of like, okay, why would you penalise a tackler not rolling? Why do you penalise players going off feet? They were actually telling us, well, these are the reasons that we coach it, players to stay upright, so that when players don't do that, this is how it affects our game. So I know from my point of view, it meant that I could understand the game better, and therefore referee it better. Would you agree? Yeah.
100%. Having coaches and players explain what they're trying to achieve to us, and then where they need us or where they need our help to implement that was massive. And just, as you said, just increased our ability to understand the game of rugby and increased our ability to referee relevantly.
Yeah.
Thanks for that, guys. So look, what I'm hearing is, if we could summarise that, they're really put in place to make the game better to watch, safer to play, better to coach. It's just a better product all around. And the other key thing I'm hearing there is that it's very much a joint effort. So the input of players and coaches was vital to it. And I think that's a really important message for our community. Rugby, the more players and coaches and referees can get together and work on the game, the better potentially, hopefully, what our outcomes will be. So, and certainly, you know, what's happening in Super Rugby Aotearoa is testament to that.
Yeah, I agree, Nada. Like, I think we're saying this at a professional level, but there's no reason that it can't happen at any level. I actually wish I had more contact with coaches and players as I was getting, you know, when I was refereeing my first club games in Dunedin, because I think it would have just increased my rugby IQ a lot faster. I think it's really important, you know, that we increase that contact throughout all of New Zealand.
Yeah, I think the other thing, if I can just throw it in, is that law is not just for referees. And whilst these priorities are based on law, these priorities are not for just referees alone. It's really important that our coaches and players are familiar with them so that they can, you know, evolve them in unison with the referees. So whilst we've got referees, to everybody that's out there, whilst we've got referees on this panel, it's not a referee thing. It's actually a rugby thing. And I think that's really important to remember. So whilst it is based on law's for everyone. And this is just a really good example of taking law, putting it into practice that enhances it for everyone, not just referees. Oh, that's really good clarity around where the priorities came from. So, look, just reflecting on last year, moving into this year, I think you mentioned that you had a bit of a trial run with it last year, did really well, but obviously evolved it this year. So how do you think we're going relative, for those who are watching European rugby, Japanese rugby, African rugby potentially, how do you think we're going relative to other areas in the world that are playing rugby where we probably had a jump on them? Over.
Yeah, I think we're doing really well. We definitely had a jump on them, and I remember if we think back, Jimmy, to Super Rugby Aotearoa round 1 last year, there was 60 penalties in the game, and throughout that competition, we sort of started really, really high, and it sort of dipped down a bit, and then, you know, it sort of seesawed as we were firstly referees. We were trying to actually understand, okay, what we should be refereeing, because, you know, when you get told what the priorities are and you have all these meetings, that's different to actually how you actually implement them on the field. So we were trying to adapt to that, but then also the players and the coaches were actually trying to adapt to how it needed to be coached and how it needed to be actioned on the field. So there was sort of this natural bit of back and forth throughout the whole season. And by the time we got to probably the third, 3 rounds to go, I think everyone sort of gelled. So where, referees, we started actually understanding, okay, how we need to referee these priorities well. The players got really accurate at actually being, but by playing with the priorities, and then we got an awesome games of rugby. And I think that's what we saw this year, where from round 1 all the way up until last weekend, we had the Crusaders versus the Chiefs. We almost had up until the second to last round, anyone could have made that final. And then when at the same time while we're watching Super Rugby Aotearoa in New Zealand, we're watching Six Nations, we're watching the top league in Japan. And because potentially they haven't had the reinforcement of the priorities like we have in New Zealand, and I also think player quality, we got really top players in New Zealand as well at all levels. You watch that, and then, so for example, space offsides, it just really sticks out that, there's players are halfway up the ruck, players are advancing in front of the kicker, where, we did a lot of work last year to stop that. And I remember it being really hard, Jimmy. In the middle of last year, we were copying a bit of criticism. We were giving high penalty counts. The games are pretty stop-start. But now I think I look back on that and I see sort of the games that we have now, obviously mainly because of the players too. It's really just unlock those games and unlock the potential of the players so that, we can get a Damien McKenzie or a Will Jordan get a high ball, because players aren't offside, they win in front of the kicker, they can counter attack, and we have an awesome counter attacking opportunity.
You know, 100%. I think the biggest point you raised there is that little jump and that journey that we were on. Last year, the first couple of rounds, it took us a while to just sort of adjust to, what were very different philosophies of what we had refereed before that. I think even in space, is something as simple as when we were talking about space and, referees, we always like to deal with the clear and obvious infringements. So, with space, we were talking about clearly and obviously offside, which led to, 1 or 2 penalties of space called a game. Whereas now you're looking at 4 or 5 or 6 offside calls in a game. And I sort of look at where potentially the European rugby, Japanese rugby is at the moment, is they're just going through that transition period where referees are adapting to new pictures, coaches are adapting to actually what the referees are going to be refereeing. So how can they coach their teams to adapt to that? And, I think in the lead up to that final, Ben, there was a couple of games that were replayed from pre-COVID Super Rugby. So looking back at games that we were involved in, where we thought we were pretty accurate around space and pretty accurate around the breakdown, to our journey 2 years later now going, man, that stands out really different. There's very, very different pictures at both at breakdown and at space. So it is a journey. I think that New Zealand, we've been lucky this year. We've had the same 5 referees from last year into this year, so the same experiences. We didn't have learnings to go through, same coaches, same players that had been through that journey before. So just something to build on, and now we all know what the new game looks like. And it's just about, it's about the rest of the people going through their first season, the rest of the world going through their first season, taking those learnings and moving forward. And the good thing is worldwide, there's a lot more collaboration going on around those pictures. So World Rugby are meeting with referees throughout the world that then go and do this in their country and meet with their referees to hopefully get that message out and get those priorities out. But it is a journey.
It's important as well, because we're always told. I remember being in I used to live in Wellington, where you go into the referees meetings. They meet every week, and they would always have clips around about what we did in Super Rugby and how it was difficult for them to do the same thing in community rugby, and I agree with that. But I did a club game a few weeks ago now in Auckland, and what was amazing to see is that it's come down. Where actually the space in club rugby, like I was talking about in front of kicks and ruck offsides and players stopping, it was excellent. So I think there's been a lot of work, obviously, at the community level as well, where they're actually, they're understanding what the priorities are too, and because we're showing good examples of it, people can see how it's actioned in, and then we're getting it in what is the Bunnings Cup this year, and then community rugby. So I think we never try and forget that, do we, Jimmy? But it's just good when like the whole game is changing in New Zealand for the better.
Yeah, it highlights the support that that players have in New Zealand around their coaches, and that really is what drives it. Ben, we need to make decisions on the field. The coaches then drive it at trainings, and then it hopefully that journey or that natural movement will occur, and the learnings will occur and go through the grades.
Yeah, that's fantastic, and it's interesting. I mean, I'm hoping everybody realises that in the community game that these priorities actually came in to community rugby last year as well. So we're actually in our second year of it in community rugby. It's obviously a bit easier when you've got a team of 5 working at it constantly as you go through Super Rugby Aotearoa. But equally, it sounds like there's some good stories coming out of community rugby where coaches and players have embraced it for the betterment of the game. So that's really good. It's probably a good time actually just to say before I forget it, is if there's anybody out there watching that is not familiar with them or hasn't seen them, these game priorities have been put out in every PU, in every referee club. So any of the game development staff that work in provinces that you reside in, they will have access to this resource and any information that you need around it. So don't feel you need to be starved of information. It is out there and available. I just thought if we look at the key areas of the priority, so the broad groups, there was the offside one, so there's a number of things there. Offside, set piece, set up. There was another priority around attitude towards the referees from players, etc. If we look across the various priorities that were there, what do you think would be the most successful areas for you as referees that you felt made the game better? Not only to referee, but you think made it better to play for the players?
Space.
Just want to put a bit more detail in there, Jim, for us?
Well, I think obviously space, as Ben's already alluded to, it's pretty, to be honest, I said space because it's just so simple. That's the only one word, it's so simple to me. That's been the biggest change, is giving, the best, some of the best athletes in the world more time and to show their athletic ability and their skill level off is a no-brainer. I think, as Ben touched on, some of the moves and some of the action that we've seen this year, I was watching the breakdown the other night and they were talking about, the fullbacks and how they've been running through and basically carving up at Super Rugby Aotearoa. And it's simply because they've got more time to operate. I mean, in terms of my simple rugby mind, I'm sure there's coaches that are out there that know a lot more around why that space is occurring. But, from our point of view, we're looking at the fact that there's the in front of kicks that we're trying to get across and trying to change is essentially giving them, 2 or 3 more seconds to weigh up an option and hopefully not be under pressure to just kick it back, but actually run it back. So, and then the same thing in terms of space from ruck, more time and space to actually get the ball out wide or to come up with an inside ball move or something exciting rather than just having to go 3 phases and then realize that line speed and, their time to put anything together is cut down too much. So they kick it away again. So for me, I've just seen a massive difference in team option taking because they've got more time to do so.
Yeah, I totally agree, Jimmy. I mean, it wasn't easy at the start, I guess, because we had to change a lot of habits in the players, and I guess in ourselves as referees too. Now, the beauty of it was, though, is because we had that meeting where the coaches and the players got involved, and it was actually their priorities. It was very easy for us to then say that, when we were getting a lot of flack in the first few rounds about too many penalties, too many offside penalties, we could go back and say, look, this is what you guys want. This is what we've been told from yourselves as coaches and players, that you want more space in the game. And we're just the implementers. We're really just doing what we've asked you to do, where previously in years before, because we didn't have that relationship, it was a bit of a standoff. So while it was hard to actually get people on board in the game, it wasn't hard, in reviews. And I'm sure in the weeks when they were being coached, because coaches were just saying, look, this is what we've been told, we've asked for it, and this is what we're going to get. Now, as referees, we had to actually break down habits that we've been made subconscious in our own mind in terms of positioning, what we do with our hands as we manage players. And that took a bit of time. So you'll notice at the back of lineouts, referees now are standing there with 2 hands up, holding both backs back. And so that was as an example, that was a change that we had to go through so that we could actually be accurate around making sure the defense stayed back, but also making sure that the attack stayed back, because probably as long as I've refereed, we've only really managed the defense. So, the attack team started getting flat ball, and then, it meant that they were actually getting an advantage illegally there. So, that was one small area. So within space, that as referees, even though we had, a lot of things that we were getting asked to do, we still had to sit back as a group and decide, okay, look, how are we actually going to do this? So we always didn't get it right. But, I think now, we've definitely noticed a shift where, commentators are more supportive, referees, we are holding players back, players are stopping. I think, Jimmy, in one of your games a few weeks ago, I think even Naoni Lamapi ran in front and turned around and stopped all his players, controlling them back as well. So I think, when I heard that, I thought, wow, okay, there is some good change there. And I guess, in terms of space, we say that was really easy. We did a lot of work in it. Players and coaches did a lot of work in it. And I think now we're sort of seeing the fruits of it. Now, Matt, you've talked about a lot of the other priorities. And I think, while we've probably nailed space, I don't think, there's a lot of other things that we're still working hard at, which is still going to take some time as well.
Cool. So look, one of the, I think, clear messages that came from that, or what I'm hearing, is that take the space one, started strong and you stayed with it. And I think so. If there's a message we can give our coaches and our referees and community rugby is stick with it, and the results will come. Obviously, in terms of game shape and opportunities for players. So, some really good messaging there, guys. Thanks for that. We've just got James, you're going to answer that question.
Yeah. So the question on covering competing for the ball at the ruck. So I'm assuming we want to be talking about the change and how that how that's changed from the focus areas to now. And that was one of the biggest areas that we had to get calibration, and what we found the toughest, because philosophically we put a lot of work into making sure that our pictures, because they happen so quickly in a game, we make sure that we put a lot of work in during the week and in practice to make sure that our pictures are really sound, so that we know that if we have the same picture across the game of 80 minutes, across the season, across the years, that we're trying to make the most similar decision, so we're the most consistent. So Ben and I are probably the two similar in our thinking pre-COVID around the Jackler, is that we would reward them more often than we would penalise them. So if we believed the Jackler got into a good position, strong on the ball, then we would be tending to reward him. So it was a little bit, and Ben, elaborate, feel free to jump in. It was a little bit of a transition period for us, looking at how we were going to reward the Jackler in this new interpretation of the Jackler having to be, supporting his body weight in a strong position to then lift the ball. Whereas previously what had been coached is the Jackler just getting into a position, latched onto that ball, unable to move, not really lifting the ball, not looking to actually get a genuine turnover, but just wanting to win that penalty. And we viewed that as good play, until the coaches came back, as Ben has already talked about, and said, mate, we want the ability for those guys to be cleaned out. Once they get into that position, it's really tough. So increase the body height of the breakdown, allow a better contest, but equally, when a guy is in that position and gives a clear lift on the ball, to reward that a lot quicker, rather than allowing him to take 2 or 3 cleanouts to get there. So that was a transition period, and I think we've done really well as a game to get that, and right across the board, to get that focus out there that the Jackler has to be in there, has to be in a lift, and has to be trying to win a genuine turnover to be rewarded. Yeah,
it's funny you say that around how our philosophies are very similar, because I agree. They were, and as referees, we often talk about because pictures happen so fast, you actually have to have a philosophy around what you're seeing and what you're going to reward. And definitely pre the priorities, it was basically, if we see a player, a Jackler, locked onto the ball, if they survive the clean out, and that was a term that I guess came into our vocabulary unnecessarily. It was all about if the player survives the clean out. So if they're locked on the ball, they might not necessarily be supporting their body weight, but if they get hit by a cleaner, hit by another cleaner, and they're still there, then we rewarded the penalty. So basically, these players were walking off the games just, neck, shoulders, backs were so sore because, to get a turnover, they were having to actually just lock in and really wait in there and actually survive about, a whole team trying to get rid of them. So that's one reason why I think they looked at the priorities and said, look, this isn't right. It's not safe, but it's also not right for the game. If a player's on the ball, the law says, and they have 2 hands on it and they lift, they should be rewarded that ball. So for us, James, it was a bit of a change, because we were trying to actually get the behaviour change of players to be higher, like you said, and also lift that ball. So all of a sudden, we were actually rewarding players a lot sooner than we'd ever done before. So that's how we had to adapt and how we had to manage it differently. So we're actually being more harder on the player that was that potential Jackler. So if they didn't show us that lift, or they weren't supporting their body weight, even if they survived the clean out, then they weren't rewarded. So while that took quite a few weeks to change, I think we eventually got there. And so, in terms of my performances, I remember with the Jackler pictures, I thought you sort of learn about it, and you do what you used to do. And then I tried to change, and I sort of pendulum swung and went the wrong way too far. And then I remember I penalised Luke Jacobson incorrectly when he was on the ball, lifted, and then I penalised him for being not supporting body weight. And he basically had the ball in front of me, saying, "Why was that not a turnover?" So you learn from that, and then I swung the other way, and then I just sort of fell in the middle. I think now, through talking with coaches and players and actually going through the experience, I think we both referee that Jackler picture really, really well. So I guess, to answer the question, it was to move away from actually you have to survive the clean out. It's actually, if you're on the ball and you lift, you should be rewarded, and that doesn't matter how slow it takes you to do that or how quick it is. So that's why, you see some quick penalties for that, or you still see the slower penalties as well.
Thanks, guys. And just maybe a little add on there. How important is getting turnover ball being to the game? So you get turnover, the game becomes a bit chaotic. Defenses aren't set, whatever. So has it been an important part of rewarding the contester over the ball and getting that turnover happening?
Well, both Ben and I are big fans. I mean, Ben a little bit more so. I mean, Ben thinks that lots of turnovers are excellent in Super Rugby Aotearoa, and I think quite rightly, because the game needs those turnovers. That needs the space to counter attack against a disjointed defensive line. So they're massive. So and the turnover, it's continuity, right? So the team, rather than having to penalise then kick to a line out, the team turns the ball over. The game has continuity in it. So turnover is good for the game. I'd love to see some stats on it actually, to see how many tries were scored from turnover ball this year. But I'd say it would be high.
Yeah, I think there are some stats out there where it shows that turnover ball, which I think includes ruck, but also kick counter attack as well. That especially where the All Blacks scored a lot of their tries. And I think it's just because it's chaotic, like you said, Matt. It's unstructured, and that's when you get the guys like the Will Jordans who can actually break the game open. So you get like a Lockie Boucher who gets on the ball, turns over, then all of a sudden it's it's how kids grew up playing rugby, chucking the ball around, and that's how we get those amazing 80-meter tries. So I think it's really important in the game. Now, what happened is it's potentially got a bit harder for them, so they've got to be more accurate under these new priorities. But as we saw the players adapt, and players have been amazing at adapting and getting better with this change. We saw some really good turnovers, and what James is alluding to is I sometimes get a bit too excited on the field and I verbalise, oh, that's a great turnover, because they are, and hopefully people at home are saying the same thing. They've got them very good at that, and often we haven't had to actually give the penalty of holding on because the players got on there, turned it over, and the ball's out to the winger already. So I think it's become a really important part of the game. And I guess, Jimmy, as we were going through that transition, I was getting really worried that we were going to move away from actually ever rewarding that picture, because part of my mantra is around quick ball, good contests, and great turnovers. So that's what I like to see in a game. But from what we've seen this year, and I think what we'll see in the future, it hasn't changed at all. They've just been better and more accurate.
Cool. Thanks for that. Look, I just want to revert back to the offside priorities, and it's one you alluded to, and that's around set piece. And it was a massive shift, obviously, keeping both back lines back at line out and at scrum. Overall, how would you summarise how important that has been for the game, the shape of the game improving? Over.
Oh, it's been so good. I wasn't a massive believer in it when it first came in, Matt. I know Chris Pollock drove it quite a bit to say, look, guys, you need to be better. This has got to be a priority. Because it wasn't actually initially a massive priority. A lot of it was ruck space and kick space. And then we sort of put on line out set piece space on top of that. But so it was a bit uncomfortable and it took a while. But now I'm seeing, so there's 20 meters between the attack and the defense now, where I think as soon as the attack got the ball, it was only 10 meters. So I just think, the style of play that we have and the quality players that we have, right from community rugby all the way up to the All Blacks in New Zealand, you give them an extra 10 meters, wow, they're going to do something with it. And I think we've certainly seen that this year. And I think it's been really, really, really good for the game.
Great. So there's a really important message there for our community rugby, is that, getting our offside sorted, keeping people onside, keeping that space. It's going to be better for everyone. So some good coaching opportunities, some great playing opportunities, and hopefully it actually makes refereeing easier as well. So stick with that. There is another question. Just while going back to the tackle ruck area, there's obviously been a significant emphasis on tackler getting out of that area. So make the tackle, obligation how to get out. Couple of things really to think about or consider. How hard is it to really make sure that person gets out? And are there any situations where you think there's just impossible, do I have an unplayable up my sleeve? We see the odd one at community rugby. Remembering in Super Rugby, the skill set of the players is significantly high. We have a significant range in community rugby. Got any advice around how we can deal with that area?
Hey, well, firstly, I think that a tackler absolutely remains the top priority in terms of this focus area. So, we've talked about Jackler, but the first process that we have to have at breakdown is to get that tackler out. So you'll often hear us say, we can't reward you because this man here is here. So even though somebody's strong on the ball, if that tackler has impacted the ball carrying side's ability to clean out, then we penalise that tackler. So that's the first thing, is that we must keep hard on that. The second thing is, I think that if we do that, the natural progression will be coaches that they'll be driving that at training. So we have to remember that referees, we can only control what's in that 80 minutes. Then teams have, potentially at community rugby 1 or 2 trainings at most to get that right. But we've got some really good coaches in New Zealand that if they see that tackler has always been refereed, that will be their number one priority when they come to breakdown. In terms of do we have an unplayable? Of course we do. So reading the fact that there's too many bodies and that the tackler doesn't have an ability to get out is different than the tackler's slow to roll and he's slowing the ball down. If he's obviously been trapped in there through no fault of his own, then of course you have a unplayable up your sleeve. But for me, that would be sort of last option, because you would have seen that or you would have had the philosophy around getting the tackler out, because we need to stay hard on that.
Yeah, I think the unplayable it's a gold option that we don't use enough, especially for safety, but also, if there's any referees on this call, many times, I've made a decision where actually it's the third thing that happened. So sometimes I think, if you miss the first decision, and then bodies just pile in because players have lost their feet and you're not sure, okay, did that player come in the side, or did the opposition lose their feet first, or was it the player that didn't roll away? An unplayable is a really good option, just to start again, because then when you start trying to guess, or you're starting to throw in the third decision, that could be 3 points to the team that shouldn't have actually got it. So obviously we want to be accurate first, but yeah, the unplayables are a really good option.
Just seeing a question pop up here that will flow in from that conversation, just around the sequence at breakdown. Yes, we do have a sequence as referees, and that's what I'm saying here. What Ben has said as well, around the tackler remains our first priority. So when a tackle occurs, we need the tackler to roll out. If he doesn't, that's the first penalty. That's the first thing we look at. And then we look at that if there was anyone else involved in that tackle, so any tackler assists, that they clearly release before they go back onto the ball. And if that's all right, then we look at the arriving players and their body shape and their point of entry. So that's the sort of progression that we go through, and that's where we sort of get our simplified breakdown pictures.
So that's a big thing at the breakdown. Like it's you read the law book. The law book's that thick. At the breakdown, you can have 21 decisions that you can make. So you actually can't think of 21 decisions, because referee a club game around the 15 games on the weekend, that tackle and breakdown is still pretty quick. So you do have to sort of try and prioritize, okay, what is the most important there? And an example is, the tackler every time. And I know that in Super Rugby and in test matches, I think what helps me is that I sort of read, okay, what is happening in this play? So is the ball carrier dominant? So therefore I'm just kind of looking at the player not rolling, at the arriving players on their feet. So that's only 2 things. Is actually the jackler or the player's isolated, so I'm just making sure that he's got a clear lift, or that he's not being taken to the side or rolled out by his neck. Or if he's been hit with a big dominant tackle, you get one of the big locks actually driving a player back, just making sure a player hasn't gone off their feet to try and seal that ball off to protect it. So You can try and simplify it to prioritize, I guess, what the right decision is going to be, and that kind of, I guess, I was trying to lead that into. We got a question as well from someone in the audience just around priorities around breakdown and set piece. So obviously in Super Rugby, I get the pleasure of having Jimmy Dolman as my assistant referee, but that's not always the case in club rugby. So the question was, how do you balance the need to maintain space, but also a presence at the breakdown set piece for those of us who don't have assistant refs, and what's more important? So that's a really good question. I think it's really hard. Like you're managing 30 players running around a field at the same time. And when you're one person in the middle, if you don't have assistant referees, it is very difficult. So I think obviously you try and go from what's in front of you. So if the ball carrier is moving forward, the passing it, breakdown is going to be really important. And then if you've got the ball at the back of a ruck, it's going to be really important. Or if the team kicks the ball downfield, it's going to be important to switch into a space mode. Or then when you get to a line out set piece as well. But so, that's still quite tough to do as you go through the 80 minutes. But what I would suggest, and my suggestion would be, okay, after 5 minutes, just have a little bit of a moment where maybe you walk into the line and just ask yourself, okay, what is the priority in this game? And probably every 10 to 15 minutes, maybe do that. Because if it's a really hard contest at the breakdown, and actually, it's pelting with rain, they're not passing the ball out to the wing that much. So it's going to be a lot of, pick and go. Well, your priority actually, and the most important thing for that game is breakdown. So that's when you're going to hone your focus in. But if you've got a beautiful day, you're in Wellington, there's no wind, and, the passing the ball out to the wing is a lot. Well, actually, probably space is really important. So I think just as you go through the game, if you have little checks like that, it's going to really help you when you don't have assistant referees to actually understand what the most important part is and how you can best referee and have an influence on that game.
Thanks, Ben, and very, very good advice there for all our listeners. So I guess what we're hearing is game context is really important about how you go about your work.
I think just
look, lots of success with the game priority.
Sorry, Matt.
Sorry.
Just on that question as well, I just had a thought around the balancing, the presence at breakdown and then set piece as well. Often we talk about first job, second job. So obviously, if the breakdown is the breakdown is your priority when the breakdown is going on. So when the breakdown's going on, there's a contest on, then that's your attention. But then if we have the ability when the ball's at the back to then turn our attention, so that's where our positioning comes into it, to turn our attention to scan. It's that first job, breakdown, contest, okay, the ball's at the back, halfback's got it, then that quick scan, first job, second job, just in terms of that specific moment.
So balancing contest, post-contest.
Contest, okay, contest is on, my attention is here. Contest is over, the ball's at the back, the team has secured it. Okay, my attention shifts here.
Yeah.
And just like Ben said, when there's a kick downfield, we know that we don't have to be looking at the ball or where it goes. We've got 2 or 3 seconds to go. Okay, kick goes. Okay, hold here, boys, hold here. Kicker puts them on, or an onside teammate puts them on. So it's just that, like Ben said, that attention.
Thanks for that, Jim. So going back to the question I was going to ask, obviously lots of things went really well with the priority areas, and we saw some significant changes in the game. Players on board, coaches on board, media on board eventually, which is great for us. I'm just wondering if there were any areas of those priorities that were a bit sticky or a bit harder to get on top of, or areas that you think you never really achieved what you wanted to when you set out into the season, which that have still got to be worked on.
I think I'll talk to one of them, and I reckon we did so much work on the tackler, so much work on the jackler, and I guess that was what our priorities were. And then what was left was side entry. Now, so side entry at the tackle. So if you've got a tackle, if you're an arriving player from the tackle, the defense, you've got to enter through the gate. Now, what we've allowed over years is that gate to be bigger, wider, extend up the ruck, extend up the tackle. So I really felt like we were sort of really trying to work against a mountain to try and change that. And so I guess that's one thing when we did our reviews at the end of the season. Side entry was one thing that we hadn't really nailed yet. We were still getting, one or two side entries in a game, which we should have been penalising. And that was right across, all five of us as professional referees. And, we were getting told by coaches, look, this is important to get because this player is on the ball. He should be rewarded the ball, but that guy's just come out, come in the side. And so it wasn't just for us, okay, we got to get better at side entry. We actually needed to understand what side entry was. What kind of angle is it that the player's coming in on? Where do they need to hit? Does it need to be the shoulder, or actually if they're hitting the side of the chest or actually lifting the leg, does that mean that is clearly side entry? What happens if a player comes from depth and then sort of comes in slightly on an angle, or do we just get the ones where the player's coming from 90 degrees? So that's one where, and fortunately, when we had the end of year review, we also had further discussions with coaches and players about it. They also thought it was difficult. They actually also didn't know what the answers were yet either. So they had to actually go back to trainings and actually decide, because a lot of stuff that we were seeing on the field was what they were getting coached to do, unintentionally meant that they were coming in the side. So it was really difficult, Matt. I actually still don't think we're there yet. I think we've done a lot of other good stuff in the game, but as a one-off in particular, another sticky part you could say is that side entry picture.
100% agree, and I 100% agree with what Ben's saying around. Actually, the issue is not us seeing side entry; it's us understanding which ones to get. And that's a sort of highlighted to me. I went into Highlanders training a few times this year, and looking at how they are actually training to clean out and how other coaches are training to clean out. It's something that in the past we may have thought of as side entry, but actually when you actually look at how they're training to do it, it's completely legal. They come from depth, and we wouldn't get that knowledge without the coaches and the players' input across the board. That's just my example because I was in with the Highlanders, but they're not the only team that have fed that through. So the next step for us is actually going, okay, so what do we need to chase here? And what are the pictures that actually we can rule on consistently rather than just getting one-offs? So that's probably the next thing that we need to do in terms of the breakdown. And I think the only other thing that we mentioned and we've talked about this year where,
with it, then clearly there's going to be some time to make the shifts in community rugby. I guess one of the triggers may be, and it's just hopefully it's not a rhetorical question, but if there's someone clearly on the ball, is that a time when potentially they will get hit from the side to try and reduce the threat of turnover? Would that be a good starting trigger for referees?
Yeah, or they've overrun. The support players have overrun.
Okay. Yeah. So that's side entry. Any other areas that you think that you didn't quite get on top of, or that our community listeners could be aware of that is a little bit more difficult to get on top of and work at?
I think one thing, Matt, is I think rugby in general is one of the best sports in the world because they respect the match officials. You watch. I'd never referee or umpire a football game just because of what players can be like. So I was really surprised and really happy where the same coaches, the same players said, look, we actually want what people are seeing on TV to be respectful. We want to keep this as a game that people enjoy playing and watching, and that includes respect for players. So that's why there's a focus on foul play and also respect for the match officials as well. So that was something that was really important for us, because as referees, we also understand that, what people see on TV is what it potentially is replicated. And I've talked about a lot of the good things in the game on a Saturday in community and club rugby. So if they see a player yelling at a referee, at the high end, even making physical contact with a referee and nothing has been done, then potentially, that gets filtered down into the community rugby as well. So that was a big thing that was talked about in our priorities. And I know that was a priority in Super Rugby. It was a priority in Mitre 10 Cup last year. And I think, that's something we talk about, okay, what can we be doing better at? That's probably something that we need to just be continually more aware of. It's hard because actually I think we have a good understanding. I think Jimmy, for example, is one of the best at managing and communicating like those heated moments. And Jimmy, you'd agree that, we do have a good understanding for what is passion, and, the difference between passion and actual, verbal abuse. Now, while we don't get a lot of it in rugby, I think, there's been situations where potentially I think we could have been better last year. And that might have actually, if people saw that we're going to take a firm stance in the ground, that might have actually reflected a bit better on, other games that are happening within New Zealand too.
Yeah, I think, as Ben said, Ben's given me nice words, but I think Ben is our best communicator in terms of that space, and being able to communicate with a heated moment and big moment where you've got, players that have been, trying their hardest for however many minutes, and then there's a big decision. The best thing that we as referees, and Ben does this exceptionally well, is to take the heat out and actually listen. Okay, listen, I hear you. Okay, and then calmly express what you need to express. But what we have in our game is that there is that respect for referees, and when we lose that, or if that's lost, then this game's in trouble. So I think that we, last year there was a drive. Actually, it came directly from the top. It came from the All Blacks coach that he did not want to see that type of behaviour or creep into rugby. So he was driving that with us, and he was driving it, which was the most important thing, is he was driving it with his players, which then his key leaders, which are leaders in the Super Rugby teams, drove it with their players, and then those players in Mitre 10. So it's definitely an all of rugby, something that all of rugby needs to be proud of.
Thanks for that, James. Thanks for that, Ben. Look, it's probably a good time maybe to wrap it up. So I guess what I'm hearing overall, the idea of the priorities, they're there to enhance the game, make it better for everyone, coaches, players and referees, make it safer, and certainly make it better for those spectators that come along and pay their money as well to watch the game. So it's a great effort that we've seen in Super Rugby, and I think you're right. You are the shop window for our community game, and it's been really, really important to community rugby that you guys do go out there and make a really, really great effort with the priorities, and it gives us real confidence, I think, in the community and the game to be able to go, right, that's what it can look like, and here's some of the really positive outcomes we can get if we stick with it. But we need to emphasise again, this just isn't a referee thing. We need the coaches on board, we need the players on board, and then everybody gets a gain out of it. So really appreciate the efforts there, guys. And before I let you go, you've obviously got another competition stage. So you've just wound down from one Super Rugby Aotearoa, boom, straight into another. What I think there's a huge amount of anticipation around our New Zealand sides playing against the Australian sides coming up. Another quick fire competition. Lots to really enjoy, and we're going to look forward to seeing how you guys progress the priorities through that competition as well. And we know you're going to be flying the New Zealand flag really, really high there. So, and that's great for our teams as well. So, look, Ben, James, if you get any final comments before Wayne wraps us up, over.
No, I just want to say, yeah, Matt, we're really excited about the next comp. I think it's going to be really exciting. I just want to say thanks for having us on tonight. Look, we often don't get a lot of time to be able to get back into the community and we love feeling connected back with the community and rugby in New Zealand. So look, it's a pleasure to be able to have it talk to you guys tonight, and we're just really proud of what rugby's done in New Zealand. I think a lot of it starts with referees, players, coaches at all levels, but especially the community level. So thanks very much.
Yeah, just reiterate what Ben said. He, as I said, he's the best communicator that we have. He sums it up really well, and it's been a lot of fun tonight. So thank you.
Thanks for your time, guys. Over to you, Wayne.
Yeah, thank you, men, and thank you for sharing your time and your expertise, and all the best. Look, listeners, thanks for your time this evening, and also thanks for the great work that you're doing on our sidelines every week. I know for most of you, the season started properly with our age grade and college rugby starting last weekend in most parts of the Mutu, and we really appreciate the great work that you're doing for our game and for our players. Remember, this is one of a series, so keep posted on our normal New Zealand Rugby portals and with emails on other webinars that are coming up. And yeah, we've all got skin in the game, as Matt said, and some really great messages there from Ben and Jimmy around building those relationships across with our players, with our referees, with our coaches. And there's a great tool for that, for knowing more about the game priorities with Rugby Toolbox. So www.rugbytoolbox.co.nz. Some great videos, great breakdown of the different priorities, and yeah, a real challenge to maybe get your players to have a look at that stuff, and if they understand what our referees are doing, then they're going to enjoy the game more. And as I said, we've all got skin in the game, and we can all benefit. So thanks for everybody who zoomed in or webinared in. I don't know if that's a word or not. And all the best. Pō Mārie.